Our very last speaker, a UKIP veteran. Please welcome Peter Muswell.
Have we got any veterans in? Hands up, please, if you're a veteran. Your bus has left. Let me just put my glasses on and I'll be with you. Good afternoon, conference. That's what I call trooping the colour, eh? Well done, troops, and that was a lovely, thank you for your lovely clapping accompaniment. My name is Pete Muswell. I'm the chairman of UKIP Hackney and Islington. Yes, Islington, that heartland of champagne socialism where I was born and bred, and where you could stick a red rosette on a pig and it'd get elected. Look at that look on my face. So I didn't mean that she was, I really didn't, if that was sort of... So yes, I am the guy that stood against that delightful Emily Thornberry person in the last two general elections. Remember her tweet of shame about the white van man and his England flags? Now, against such massive odds in Islington, I'm often asked, why'd you even bother? Well, I served 16 years in an airborne territorial army signals regiment because I believe in serving my country. I also believe that somebody has to stand up for the decent, ordinary, hard-working people of this country. You know, the people the Labour Party used to represent and the Tories have neglected and forgotten. Yeah, that's me up on the top right. 1974, keep cooling and want the moustache back. So look, this is my first time speaking at a conference and only a few of you will know me. So before I come on to talk about some veteran issues, with your permission, I'd like to tell you a little bit about me, about my political journey, and why UKIP is my permanent political home, and I'm not going anywhere. Now, I'm just an ordinary London lad who came from a broken home, got into a grammar school, and then secured an engineering apprenticeship at BT. I did pretty well there. 18 years later, I left BT to start my own telecoms consultancy, advising city clients on a wide range of communication technologies. And over the last 15 years or so, I've travelled the world training foreign law enforcement and intelligence agencies on the technologies needed to track and apprehend transnational criminals working primarily in counter-terrorism. As a young BT engineer back in the 80s, I had a job to install a couple of lines in the brand new offices of a brand new party called the SDP. Anybody will remember them? Shirley Williams and the Gang of Four. Well, there was a very nice man there who offered me a cup of tea. It was a boiling hot day, actually. I remember it clearly. It was just like today. And I was so grateful. That party eventually became the Liberal Democrats. And that cup of tea got them my vote for the next 35 years. I had no idea about that party's policies, but I knew they weren't Labour, and I knew they weren't the bloody Tories. I assumed, and I'd hoped, that they represented the middle ground. Now, they say that most people get into politics over a single issue. For me, it was in 2009 when my elderly mum's luncheon club had its funding cut. For many of those elderly ladies, there were a couple of guys there, but it was mostly old ladies, it was the only time all week that they actually got to see another living soul. There we are. Oh, and there's Islington's little mayor coming down to press the flesh with the poor. I was absolutely livid. So, having voted Lib Dem 35 years, I joined the party, stood in 2010, nearly got elected. I was only 200 votes short. They asked me to stand again in 2014, which was about the same time that my party's beloved leader at the time, Nick Clegg, challenged Nigel Farage to have a debate about our membership of the EU. And he got his arse right royally kicked, I can tell you. You could say I'd been radicalised by Nigel Farage. I quit the Lib Dems and I joined UKIP. My wife threatened to divorce me. But after watching those TV debates, I now understood how mass, uncontrolled migration had been hurting the very poorest people across the whole of Europe, forcing them to compete with each other for the lowest paid jobs in a race to the bottom, where the rich always won and the poor always lost. By contrast, poor developing and non-EU countries were being badly hurt by EU common external tariffs that severely hindered their efforts to trade their way out of poverty. We are not haters in UKIP. We don't want to beggar our neighbours. I don't think so anyway. I'm pretty sure we don't. Nobody blames anyone for wanting to come to this great country for a better life. Both sets of my great-grandparents did exactly that. Russian Jews on one side, Italian Iranians on the other. I married an Anglo-Indian. My daughter married a Jamaican. I've got 3 beautiful mixed-race grandsons. Actually, I call them my grand thugs. Gorgeous. Now look, I'm not interested in the colour of their skin or where they come from, just the content of their heart. And to make sure that when they come here, they want to embrace our culture, not change it. That's what I call cultural enrichment. However, we have brain-drained skilled professionals from poorer countries while simultaneously exploiting their low-skilled workers for cheaper nannies, gardeners, and baristas. As a result, we'd never even heard of the word barista before. Don't go there. As a result, we've overburdened our schools, housing, NHS, welfare services, neglecting the very people whose taxes paid for it all in the first place. I'm sorry, it's just plain wrong. I've lived on the same Islington Council estate for 37 years, and I've run our community centre for much of it. Many of you will have attended previous leadership hustings there. Tragically, the first 2 stabbings of 2018 took place in the early hours of New Year's Day, right next door to that centre. Just pausing for a moment before I move on, the figures that were discussed this week were that up to date, 46 deaths by stabbing in London and 74 murders, violent murders, so stabbing and beating up and shooting. London's Mayor Carnage, as we like to call him, says that knife crime is just part and parcel of living in a big city. Yeah, well, stuff you, Khan. What a disgusting defeatist attitude. It's just unacceptable, Mr. Khan. Statistically, because of the colour of their skin and where they live, my grandsons are more likely to become involved in gun crime, knife crime, or drug dealing than any other group. Now, over my dead bloody body will I allow that to happen, but this is often the result when councils try to cram more flats onto already overcrowded estates, which have been overcrowded through their overdevelopment. That's just one of my local blocks of flats where I've helped them, fighting council plans to just cram loads more all around that area. Therefore, with so many kids from poor families turning to crime, our little community started to organise ways to help keep the kids off the streets and away from the gangs. We ran subsidised taekwondo classes. And with so much inner city poverty, we began to get a food bank up and running. On Christmas Eve 2017, just a week before those stabbings that I just mentioned, we held our first trial run of the Finsbury Food Bank. I couldn't believe how many people queued up outside to take advantage of the donations. It was bloody heartbreaking. I'll never forget one of them, a single mum who had been in the same nursery class as my own son, who's now 40, so a long time ago, and she's got 2 little girls of her own. She broke down on my shoulder and she said, "Pete, you just don't know what a difference this has made to us. I'm a big, rough, tough, hairy-arsed ex-para. I've jumped out of aeroplanes. I've abseiled out of helicopters. That is actually me up there. Go on, next one. There, look, see, stained moustache. I don't mind admitting that that day, that young lady made me cry. Unsurprisingly, the council have now knocked down our community centre and built another block of flats there. Conference with so many poor families struggling to survive, many are driven to food banks like the one we were trying to set up. Some even end up on the streets like many of our brave veterans. These are just some of the reasons why I am sticking with UKIP. I'm in for the long haul. In my old regiment, we used to joke that the most dangerous thing in the army was an officer with a map. Okay, chaps, follow me. I know where we're going. Oh, no, I've got the map upside down. I've got to tell you, though, we were wrong. The most dangerous thing to the British Army is actually a Westminster politician. Folks, successive governments, both Conservative and Labour, have let down our armed forces, both when on active service and when they return home as veterans. Frankly, whenever I put on my veteran's lapel badge, I feel a bit of a fraud. I've never seen action or fired a shot in anger. But through my community work, I have gained a real understanding of the issues facing some of our veterans when they return home. Many of our bravest citizens are being left to fend for themselves after years of loyal service. But surely, it's the nation's duty to properly look after those who have sacrificed so much for their country. Thank you. It is no exaggeration to say here that we owe everything to the brave men and women of our armed services. Our freedom, our democracy, our peace, everything. Could I just ask all the veterans that are here to just stand up for a moment? Can I just ask you, UKIPers, audience, let's thank them from the bottom of our hearts with a rousing UKIP round of applause. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard of PESCO. So let me give you a little bit about this EU monstrosity. PESCO, or Permanent Structured Cooperation, is a new EU treaty intended to bind EU members to jointly develop defence capabilities and make them available for military operations to support EU foreign policy. It has been designed to enhance the EU's capacity as an international military force. Let that sink in for a minute. An EU military force? No one has yet managed to explain to me why a trading club of friendly nations needs a military capability. What exactly do they want to do? Blockade American chickens? Stop Jamaican bananas from coming in? Prevent the British Navy from protecting our fishing waters, perhaps? PESCO means that once we are fully signed up to it, the EU could compel Britain to send troops to fight on EU operations, even if it's not in line with our own foreign policy or against our national interests. It is, in effect, the European army that Nick Clegg tried to convince us was a dangerous fantasy during that TV debate in 2014. Well, his dangerous fantasy is now a dangerous reality, one that undermines Britain's independent defence capability. It's an outrage, plain and simple. Of course, Remainers claim that the EU has been responsible for the peace we have enjoyed these past 80 years. No matter how much they try and pull the wool over our eyes, we all know it is NATO, not the EU, that has been responsible for maintaining that peace. In 1990, the UK had about 305,000 servicemen and women available to defend our country. Did you know that that's more than double what we've got today? Our military resources have been seriously depleted. And just like our other two key services, the police service and the National Health Service, they are constantly running at full stretch. In January 2003, the BBC reported the National Audit Office as saying, more than half the soldiers in the British Army buy their own kit because the standard issue is inadequate. Well, with repeated cuts in defence spending over recent years, that situation hasn't improved, it's just got worse. And the way we treat them after they get home is absolutely scandalous. In December 2016, the Telegraph reported that Phil Shiner of Public Interest Lawyers, I quote, brought thousands of allegations of historic abuse against British troops in Iraq that forced the government to set up the Iraq Historic Allegations Team. Almost all those claims are now known to be unfounded. Absolutely disgusting. Well, at least they struck him off, the bastard. Excuse me, I'm forgetting myself. At least he got struck off. The chief exec of the Solicitors Regulation Authority actually said, "We welcome the Solicitors Disciplinary Tribunal decision to strike off Professor Shiner, who has been found to have been dishonest." He went on to say, "His misconduct has caused real distress to soldiers, their families, and to the families of Iraqi people who thought that their loved ones had been murdered or tortured. More than £30 million of public funds were spent on investigating what proved to be false and dishonest allegations." End quote. That's a lot of money that could have been spent on housing our veterans instead of hounding them. But folks, we have soldiers who served in Northern Ireland being investigated now for actions taken over 35 years ago, and all the while known IRA members suspected of sectarian killings have been given letters of comfort saying they would not be prosecuted. Did you know that Soldier F goes on trial in Londonderry in Northern Ireland next month? Scandal! The moral cowardice of this government is beyond belief. They have failed to challenge the politically correct dogma that persists throughout Westminster, allowing genuine virtues like honour, integrity and natural justice to be replaced by virtue signalling. They have failed to challenge the common purpose agenda that has permeated the upper echelons of our government, police and armed services. And they have failed, woefully failed, to properly support veterans who return home from active service and receive little or no help finding work, getting housing, or dealing with mental health issues like PTSD. A life of sacrifice and service, and for what? Just to be abandoned by a heartless political class. And if Remainers get their way, soon it will be the EU that decides when our brave troops are deployed. Well, and you can join in with me on this one, to paraphrase Churchill, this is something up with which we will not put. The true patriots of UKIP will never forget the sacrifices of our veterans in the defence of our realm. I'm angry that these brave men and women have been treated with such disrespect, harassed and threatened with prosecution for so-called historic crimes. I'm angry that heroes who've put their lives on the line are denied the proper tools, equipment and support to do their job. And I'm angry. No, actually, I'm bloody furious that they come home only to be forgotten, left to rot on the streets of Britain, with many reluctantly forced to beg for handouts, some even taking their own lives. It is heartbreaking that the soup kitchens around the country are filled with veterans. Without a home, they can't get a job. Without a job, they can't afford a home. We abandon them to a vicious circle that leaves many spiralling downwards into a life of depression, destitution and despair. Our politicians should hang their heads in shame. But ladies and gentlemen, there is no shame in being proud of our country or in serving under its flag. UKIP will always proudly support our veterans and honour their courage and sacrifice. Guided by our core principles of moral integrity, rectitude and brutal honesty, UKIP will never abandon them as our political class have abandoned them. We will continue to fight for the same fundamental rights that generations of brave servicemen and women have fought and died for. Freedom of thought, of word, and, within reason, of deed. With democracy and justice for all. UKIP stand alongside our veterans in a battle for an independent Britain, a Britain that can forge its own path to a brighter, stronger, prosperous future for all its citizens. This is what it means when we talk about British values. We will always be here to expose the cowardice and betrayal of politicians who fail to honour our military covenant, or to stand up for the ordinary, decent, hard-working people of this great nation. A decent nation doesn't betray its finest citizens. And UKIP will never forget those who have given their all in defence of our great Britain. Conference, I pray that through our steadfast belief in these core values, coupled with the honourable principles of self-sacrifice, of service to nation, and of putting country before party, we can sow seeds of hope in the garden of tomorrow, so that our children and our children's children can inherit a better, happier and safer world. Thanks in no small part to our superb armed services and our wonderful veterans. Thank you, conference.